energy. It's so accursed. What's up, guys? I'm here, and we are on to do a breakdown / live reaction and review of MahisTV's Is Jujutsu Power System any good? I thought it said Jujutsu Kaisen. Is Jujutsu Power System any good? Is Cursed Energy good as a power system? This is going to be an interesting one. I saw this pop up in my recommended feed, and I've actually been meaning to talk about Cursed Energy as a power system for a while, but I was kind of waiting for, like, a little bit more of it to be explained, because, like, there's still so many aspects of the system that have gone unexplained despite being 255 chapters deep at the time of recording. But regardless, I'm very interested to see what MahisTV has to say. This is my first video of theirs, so who knows? But presumably it's going to be gas, because once again, I've said it before and I'll say it again, I've yet to run into a bad JJK tuber. So let's not waste any more time, and let's hop right into it. Editing me, are you ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
What makes a good...
What's up, guys? That guy with it. Pencil here. Fun fact, I do happen to have it on me and keep it on me at all times. And another fun fact, Cursed Energy. Cursed Energy is a very interesting power system for how vague yet specific it is. Notably, one of the biggest things, in my opinion, that you need to have when you're writing a power system is either hard, fast, solid, consistent rules, so your readers know what can happen somewhat, but can still be surprised if the rules are well established enough, but they can be used in interesting ways, or soft enough and flexible enough that basically anything can happen, but not being so soft and so flexible that basically anything can happen. Now, what do I mean? Notably, for an example of a loose power system, where almost anything but not everythking can happen. Ki from Dragon Ball. It's one of the most well-known power systems in anime and manga for good reason. Dragon Ball is one of the most well-known anime and manga ever for good reason. But with that being the case, Ki can kind of do anything. Like, especially the multiple different types of Ki, whether it be normal Ki, whether it be God Ki, whether it be destruction energy, whether it be holy, that's not energy. But regardless, there are many different types of Ki, but they all have their own unique properties, their flexibilities, and their base attributes. The ability to enhance one's strength, what it's composed of, and the ability to form it into attacks of all different varieties. Ki allows for that. It is a spread out enough system that allows for basically anything to occur within reason. Of course, no one's going to whip out like a, I don't know, a multiversal Ki bomb. Well, power wise it's probably multiversal, but like no one's gonna just randomly annihilate a billion trillion different people with like one specific Ki magic attack, because that's not a thing. But there's the opposite, where you have a very, very strict power system that still technically allows flexibility and freedoms, and that's obviously the most famous power system in terms of balance of all time, I'm pretty sure at this point. I don't know. I've yet to hear people argue otherwise. But Nen. Yeah, Nen. Just do Nen. Like, that's typically the golden standard for a power system, where everything is well laid out and explained. We even have, like, a whole block of text properly explaining all the different Nen types and the flexibilities that can come with it, and that's the important thing. There are strict rules, there are strict types of Nen users, there are strict abilities you can do with certain types of Nen, but the sky is the limit to how these rules and binds can be implemented. If I had to take a shot at what JJK does, and why I think it's a solid power system, and why I actually like it a whole lot, is because it kind of has the best of both worlds, where that was awful. I am so sorry for your ears. But it has the best of both worlds in the sense that it does have the rigid rules. It has the logic, the luck, the understanding that comes with the system. You can reinforce yourself with Cursed Energy, but you can't heal yourself with it. If you figure out Reverse Curse Technique, you can heal yourself with it. You need to be high level Reverse Curse Technique to heal other people with it. And specifically, if you do not have a Curse Technique, you cannot, I repeat, cannot spontaneously make one, or develop one, or gain one. You need to be born with one. And then the applications of Cursed Energy through that technique are whatever the technique is based on the field of Cursed Energy. That's basically the fundamentals of Cursed Energy. But there's enough freedom, flexibility, and mystery and hypothetical shock value that can come out of it through the system mechanics like Black Flash, through the things like Binding Vows, due to the numerous different ways you can allocate Cursed Energy in your body for reinforcement, or even allocate RCT for restoration. There's a lot of freedom and flexibility allowed in the Jujutsu Kaisen system, and that essentially opens the door to the many different powers we see, from the Straw Doll technique, to the Ten Shadows technique, to the Limitless technique, to any technique in the series. And even then, the Jujutsu Kaisen power system is so impressive to me, because when the opposite is considered, when you have no cursed energy, absolutely zero, you get the opposite effect. Yet simultaneously the same effect with the extreme strengthening, heightened senses, and all that. So in my opinion, the Jujutsu power system is pretty darn solid. The only thing I would improve about it is that binding vows need to actually be explained and given a proper cost. Other than, like, the costs that are naturally attributed to binding vows. Like, we need a little bit more explanation on how certain trade-offs work. Like, Nen contracts essentially are binding vows with less steps. Be it simultaneously more steps. But let's see what Mahis has to say. I've been kind of just yapping. Let's see.
Power system. Flashy moves, elaborate incantations, the amount of decibels being produced. I think it's all about making sense within its own rules. Cause you can preach all you want about increased blood flow, elevated heart rate, and frequent gasping, but ain't no way that makes your equipment any harder. I was talking about a sword, by the way. Hello, comrade. My name is Mahis.
What do you mean? When I breathe real hard, my bleed. Oh, no, let me not even make that joke. But yeah, that's true. And that's the thing, the internal consistency. And here's the thing. Here's my thing about power systems in particular. You can break rules. You can. Nen is one of the most solid power systems, but you can break its rules in a way. Look at the most famous example of breaking a rule or starting a contract and the cost of it. You can do it, but the cost needs to be proportional. That's my biggest thing. You always, if you're gonna break a rule, there has to be a good reason for that rule to be broken, number one. And two, that rule better have some consequences for being broken. Those are the two big things. That's the big money moves right there. But let's see. He is right. He's spitting.
Come, get yourself a beverage and sit down with me. We got negative energy to evaluate. Let's start by giving this spectacular spectacle a brief rundown. What exactly is Jujutsu and what's with all these crazy terms? Seriously, innate curse technique, 3 words just to say superpower. Thank God for quirks from Hirakoshi and then from Togashi. I'm kidding, but in order to explain it, I will use simpler terms and there might be a spoiler or two. You've been warned. Cursed energy is a secondary resource that everyone has, very few can benefit from, and even fewer can actually use. They're called sorcerers, people who employ cursed energy to, at minimum, see supernatural beings, and at maximum, organize a nationwide battle royale. It's very diverse in its applications, yet it's mostly used to deliver indiscriminate punishment to people you don't like. Makes sense, there are only a handful of sorcerers, you can't really integrate it into the life of the general populace, so what else are you supposed to do other than bonking each other with these extracurricular powers? Anyway, there are 2 ways to utilize cursed energy.
And that is, here's the thing, that's a good thing about JJK as the binding... I keep talking about binding vows or binding things, but that's one of the good things about JJK as a power system, and Jujutsu specifically as a power system. Yeah, it's not easily accessible to everyone. It is mostly a Japan exclusive thing with rare exceptions outside the nation, like Miguel. That's very, and Miguel's family, because we do know the Black Robe wasn't made by Miguel, it was made by his ancestors. So there definitely are other sorcerers outside of Japan, but it's mostly localized to Japan, and that avoids issues. Like, for example, a world like My Hero Academia, a lot of questions tend to happen on what's happening outside of Japan. Of course, a lot of the heroes are localized there, but quirks are a worldwide phenomena. 80% of the people in the world have quirks in the world of MHA. You mean to tell me out of the numerous billions of other people who have a variety of quirks, not a single one of them would be useful to tackle in the narrative, not a single one of them would be broken? We never necessarily get any exploration or establishment on that, at least within the main narrative. Vigilantes does it, but Vigilantes is a side manga. That's been over for a while now. So we don't necessarily get to explore that too much. That becomes a world-building issue. For something like Ki, why haven't more people discovered it? It's a universal power system. Everybody has it. Why haven't they tried to refine it or use it more properly if it's so well known? Or at least accessible enough that people could stumble across it in the first place and then go on to refine and master it. But with the way that JJK sets up its power system, it essentially gets to, not necessarily, but I guess, yeah, skirt by the fact that, oh yes, you see, don't you worry. Allow me to put up this beautiful invisible wall. There is no power system that is universally accessible. Only a very few can access it. And thusly, that's why there's so little competition or so little external world building. Because it literally can't happen. Because the power system is super duper limited. And it's even limited in amongst those who can have access to it, like he said, by the explicit stacking of requirements. Oh, do you want a curse technique? Oh, well, if you weren't born with one, or you have very specific or special means to get one later, then you don't have one, and you can't use it. And even if you do have access to cursed energy, like a bunch of people in Japan do, you don't know how to use it. And if you don't know how to use it, you're going to become a sorcerer. That's really, really good. It allows, ironically enough, it is a good thing because it limits the scope of who can have it. And by limiting the scope of who can have it, it means that less questions need to be asked on a grander scale. That's the thing. Notably, this is something that a lot of fantasy, or at least stories that take place in separate worlds, don't necessarily have to address all too often unless the author is specifically interested in addressing it. Like, for example, well, I can't even think of a good example, but essentially, when a world is loosely based around ours, like a JJK, like an MHA, like any planet, any story that's basically based on Earth, you'll always have the question of what happens with the outside world. Why do they not use a power system? But when you limit it like this, especially since it's specifically a phenomena so heavily heightened in Japan, you get to have the benefits of everyone having superpowers, but only the characters who you want to be relevant having superpowers. So essentially, a very, very, very small subsection of the Japanese. Smart stuff. Of course, this does... and I'll admit, JJK as a power system is a bit strange, because remember, you can just be randomly born with an extremely powerful curse technique, even if both of your parents are non-sorcerers. I remember Geto, born with one of the most powerful and pivotal techniques in the entire series, did not come from a sorcerer line. He was just born with curse spirit manipulation, and extremely high energy reserves, and overall a great capacity for Jujutsu. So the randomness of the system still allows for stuff like that, but the limits are still well established to the point where not everybody and anybody can become superhuman. But let's see.
A general approach, such as empowering one's body, creating barriers and blasting it, or through a personal ability called Innate Curse Technique, which is a unique, sometimes hereditary, pre-installed. A general approach, such as empowering one's body, creating barriers and blasting it.
Notably, at least from my understanding of it, blasting's actually pretty rare. Like, in spite of certain characters having infinite cursed energy, spoilers for the entire JJK manga, but like, I think you should know that if you're on my channel. But like, if you don't, spoilers, so run away if you don't want those. But like, the only characters who have displayed explicit blasting of just generic cursed energy is Yuta Okotsu, Ryu Ishigori, and that's it. I don't think anyone else has, which is weird to think about, but it seems to be like a really, really exclusive ability. Hikari can't do it, despite having crazy amounts of cursed energy. Gojo specifically needs to cycle it through his technique, and then he can sometimes launch it out, but at least not in this beam format. Sukuda's never displayed this ability, so it seems strange, but blasting's actually pretty rare. I don't think most people can do that. Is it weird why? Yeah, you would think it'd work like a basic power system where you can just blast out the energy, but at least it seems so rare that I don't think that's actually a universal mechanic. That's something you either need to unlock or need to be born with, like Ryu and Yuta were. Interesting stuff. Let's see.
Or through a personal ability called Innate Curse Technique, which is a unique, sometimes hereditary, pre-installed driver in your brain that allows you to access a very particular set of skills. You're born with it and kinda stuck, to be honest, because good luck making Boogie Woogie work if you're built like Ijichin, no offense. In both cases, you channel energy to achieve whatever result, with the only difference being the form of the spell, where if it's your innate ability, the form is already made for you, and if it's a general spell, you have to create your own. This is quite interesting, because if you look at this bell curve, Jujutsu Kaisen will fall right in the middle. On the right hand side, we have a spell casting system, where the magic happens through, well, spells that are made for a specific purpose. And the left hand side, which is a much more flexible system, where there are no incantations nor formulas and magic just flows avatar style. In this sense, Jujutsu Kaisen reminds me of Mushoku Tensei, Black Clover and such, where you can choose what type of magic to use in a given situation. However, this...
Oop, that's a perfect word. But yeah, that is a fantastic point. That is honestly a fantastic point. Because what essentially comes up here is the idea of a imbalance, right? An imbalance between characters, an imbalance between how characters could hypothetically operate, right? But the reason this imbalance actually works in the favor of Jujutsu Kaisen is because of the flexibility that comes with it. Because it falls right in the middle, you can have the best. Whereas as long as they meet the basic criteria, there are certain applications that everybody has access to, such as barrier formation with the right incantations, such as cursed energy reinforcement, and depending on the level of the sorcerer RCT. That allowance for generic base level abilities, but the specification that is required for some of those abilities allows for incremental complexity, which I think is important for a power system, because the issue is if you leave your power system a bit too bare, a bit too basic, without sort of special incantations or anything like that, or without levels to it really, it can kind of become generic and also feel a bit random when characters start doing stuff. But JJK, like I mentioned before, has the best of both worlds, where you do have your basic stuff you don't need to work too hard for, like just strengthening your body, but also the higher level stuff that leads to more complications, and that leads to more interesting fights, and that leads to more complications within those interesting fights that will lead to more interesting character conflict and character development based on how these characters grow to understand their own abilities, which works in the favor of JJK, which is a obviously predominantly battle manga. It allows for a freedom and flexibility that you get from a soft magic system, yet the perks and benefits of a hard magic system with the spells, enchants, and incantations. If there's one weakness I had to give JJK though, it's the fact that chanting and hand signs are explicitly very, I'm not going to say all too rare, because domain expansions have been domain expansions since the first domain expansion all the way back in chapter 16. But in terms of regular techniques, outside of like aiming and stuff like that, and in terms of chanting, outside of domain expansions, they never really get brought up until the more recent chapters with the Gojo and Sukuna fight and everything that's going on beyond that. We're now fully delving into the importance of hand signs and incantations and chanting, where for a majority of the series I can't even think of other characters chanting unless maybe it was to set up a barrier. Yeah, not a single person chanted to activate their technique, at least off the top of my head. So I will admit, if there is a weakness to JJK, it feels like a very important part of the power system kind of gets like swept under the rug until Gege decides now it's going to be relevant. Like Hashimo never chants. Hakari never chants except for his domain. But once again, all the domain users chant for theirs. Gojo doesn't chant. But once again, that plays... And here's the thing. That's the trick. That's the trick. I find it an issue because of how important it is now. But the trick of JJK is that subtraction's actually encouraged. You don't want to have to chant. You don't want to have to do hand signs. That's limiting. So technically, my issue that I have with it is only because everyone we see in the series is very, very good at Jujutsu. Thusly, they do a whole bunch of subtraction. Which is like... But with how important hand signs in general are, I think they should have gotten... Hand signs and chants are. I think they should have gotten more notoriety before the ultimate fight of the series in Gojo versus Sukuna, and now the after effects in the final arc. At least that's my opinion, though. Let's see.
Is a very superficial comparison, because in Juju, the system is quite elaborate with literal layers of cursed energy proficiency. Speaking of which, in order to even begin to use it, one needs to learn how to control their emotions. And not just because you need to have a clear mind, focus, and all that good stuff we see in almost every show, but because cursed energy comes from negative emotions, and if you let them run loose, you'll be expending said energy faster and losing control over it to the point of not being able to use it whatsoever. You have to pay attention to your and your opponent's negative emotions, since they're simultaneously a strength and a weakness. For example, one of the reasons Hanami was able to evacuate Jogo from being in the position most Gojo fans wish they were in is due to him temporarily removing all the hostility from Master and his student. Although, even if the school spin on emotions in combat sets Jujutsu Kaisen apart from most shows, I find it a bit inconsistent since the line between powering up and losing control is rather blurry. We often see characters getting quite emotional and still maintaining their sorcery, sometimes even improving it.
That is one thing, that is a true aspect of JJK that is a bit weird. But I will admit, it typically comes to a balance of loss of control versus loss of control and evolution. Like specifically for the two clips he showed, and this clip that's on screen right now, Mahito versus Itadori. Typically massive boosts in emotion of the negative kind or of the unrestrained kind are typically rewarded. Like, Megami's domain expansion was born of him losing his good mind. Yuji's new fury and rage against Mahito allowed him to leap up and do more things with his cursed energy reinforcement and do more damage. Yuji's liberation arguably comes from a massive boost in negative emotions after Sukuna left his body, plus a hypothetical liberation of his own soul and cursed energy being used to restrain Sukuna. So I'd say it's pretty consistent that the angrier characters get, or the more they steep into negativity, the stronger they get. Like, even Hanami, a character who's mostly peaceful and passive, in a sense, not actually, they end up just getting stronger once they finally appreciate fighting. And while people do fight for fun, fighting typically has a negative connotation. I'm trying to think of a time in the series where someone got, like, viciously... Here's the thing. That's the trade-off with Jujutsu, though. Typically, when characters get extremely angry or passionate or lose themselves to their emotions, they stop thinking right. This is shown even here with Yuji versus Mahito, where he kind of just starts sacrificing his body for no reason because he's not thinking straight. So he got more power, but he lost all relative control of that power. Essentially, think of it as the Super Saiyan 2 Teen Gohan effect, where yes, you are way more powerful, your gains are immaculate, you're jacked, juicy, and scrumdiddlyumptious, but ultimately, you don't necessarily gain all too much from that because you aren't able to direct it appropriately. And notably, I'll admit, a weird contradiction is sometimes characters who end up experiencing less negative emotions get drastically stronger. Like, of course, the most famous one in the entire series is Gojo's awakening. He's very explicitly noted by he himself to be feeling a void of emotions, yet he evolved through the moon. That's weird, right? And then, like, once again... there are times where characters feel like a massive boost of love or empathy or new passion, which is typically positive, like the case of Hanami, back to Hanami, and they end up getting stronger, even though they're feeling a positive emotion, but it's a positive emotion directed in a negative way. So maybe that's the same way you explain Gojo's. Yeah, he's feeling nothing, but like, I guess feeling nothing is bad, so I guess maybe that explains the most? I don't know. It is strange, though, I will admit. I agree with them. There are definitely sometimes very weird contradictions within the way the system works. And negativity in general, considering our characters aren't consistently consumed by rage and madness, it typically comes as a sub-layer. Considering characters are consistently noted to have to be intelligent and constantly in control, more so focusing that negativity as simply fuel rather than any external manifestations. We see this when Yuji's fighting Choso, and he's like, turn the pain and despair into cursed energy, and walk in. And then he locked in. But let's see.
As for the examples of the opposite, I can only think of the time Toto slapped some sense into Itadori during their fight with the Mother Nature Devil. Oh well, on to another interesting aspect of cursed energy that Hunter x Hunter and Fullmetal Alchemist enjoyers will find familiar. In order to gain something, one must offer something in return. There are at least 3 types of equivalent exchange here: a vow, a contract, and a heavenly pact. The first one is self-imposed and works exactly as Nen conditions. As long as I stand still, the golden statue claps cheeks harder. It's one of the most important concepts in Jujutsu and is used in many techniques such as New Shadow Style, Overtime, and even some domain expansions. For instance, the most common vow is revealing your own technique to the opponent, which is a smart way to legitimize people explaining their attacks mid-battle and to make it a little stronger by sacrificing the surprise factor. The second type is a
Admittedly, though, this is an interesting thing. Where people in the Fullmetal Alchemist community will be like, yeah, baby. They probably actually wouldn't be too happy with binding vows as a power system aspect in JJK, because it's very specifically not an equivalent exchange. It isn't. Like, ever. Like, notably when I'm thinking of the big binding vows, like, technically revealing your technique should be a much more massive buff than it is, especially with more complex your technique is, but the buffs are either minor or barely noticeable. Nanami's overtime, the time imbalance is there. So you mean for 8 hours of the day, he's at 80%, but then if he's working overtime either before the 8-hour shift or after the 8-hour shift, which is a longer time period, he gets a bigger buff? That's not equivalent. So, like, the JJK power system, ironically enough, while it does rely on a system of exchange, unlike Fullmetal Alchemist, and to certain degrees unlike Hunter x Hunter, the exchange is rarely, if ever, equivalent, which does allow for more freedom and flexibility, because that's one of the things that does bind Full Metal Alchemist. As much as I love this series, the fact that everything does need to be on a version of equivalent exchange, where you can't give up more than what is taken in, it does sort of limits the fights and scale to some degree, but at the same time, you avoid a problem where Jujutsu Kaisen could run into, and has run into before, where a binding vow somehow seemingly does not meet the cost. This has been a recent issue 255's release, but once again, it's the trade-offs you kind of have to make. You kind of, like, Gay, I'm not saying Gay wants to have their cake and eat it too, but at the same time, I'm not saying they have a healthy diet, if you know what I'm talking about, but let's see.
Contract between sorcerers. It doesn't make anyone stronger per se, but it's a sure way to make a deal, because breaking it will result in a disproportionate backlash on whoever bailed. Thirdly, there's the Heavenly Pact.
Now, it's interesting, you and Heavenly Restriction. Those are completely autonomous, where the first two are deals one makes consciously, the Heavenly Pact or Heavenly Restriction, as they're occasionally referred to as. Well, I feel like Heavenly Pact is the more uncommon one in comparison to Heavenly Restriction. Those are fully non-consensual. But the second thing, that's one of the biggest things I think still needs to be explained about the JJK power system, and why I could understand if someone thinks it's not really all too good. The pacts and the binding vows made between sorcerers are still extremely vague on what their consequences are. We are told they are disproportionately bad and unknown. Even Kenjaku, the longest lived, and I say lived outside of Tengen character in the entire series, doesn't actually know what will happen if a binding vow between two separate parties is broken. And I do think that's kind of bad. It's an issue, shockingly enough. I know it's going to be a completely out there reference for some people, but it's an issue that I have with swearing on the river Styx in Percy Jackson. A bunch of characters do it. We basically never get to find out what it does. And spoilers for Trial of Apollo. Apollo does it. And he has consequences. They basically mean nothing. I don't like that. And it's why I still want to see a binding vow broken between two parties. But at this point, I think it's too late. So I don't know. I feel like that's an unexplored aspect of the power system that should definitely have gotten more exploration. Like, I'm thinking of whenever the law, we know what happens if you violate the law of equivalent exchange in Full Metal Alchemist. You will lose something drastic. Remember what happened to our main characters in that show? That was very clearly laid out. But for JJK, it's pretty vague. And notably, Nen contracts, or at least Nen in general, typically, unless I'm misremembering, you can't really have contracts between two people. It always comes down to you, yourself, and I. And with that being the case, like, Kurapika has the specific setup with their Nen technique. But I don't think it really applies to anyone else. It's just them. And then the backlash would be on them. And of course, the most famous one in Gon's was one that specifically applied to him and the sacrifice of his body. So there are trade-offs in JJK, but the trade-offs are... And notably, even the trade-off for the initial binding vow, which is the one that you make with yourself, also has basically no consequence. Except for the one recently made by Sukuna in 255, where apparently he has to follow that rule. I'm not sure who he made that deal with other than himself, but apparently he can't do it, or at least that's what the chapter implies. But, like, the only thing you lose when you break a binding vow with yourself is the hypothetical trade-off you would have gotten. Oh no, you incur no damage, which I also think is kind of a little bit whack. You incur no backlash, but at the same time, freedom and flexibility. So, like, you gotta have freedom and flexibility. You can't necessarily have everyone bound to it too much. And to be fair, those kind of binding vows typically don't get much use. I'm trying to think. Like, outside the one Sukuna made and outside the one Nanami made with Overtime, I can't necessarily remember many other times those types of binding vows were, like, important or valid. But let's see.
Pretty much a regular vow with only one caveat. It's placed on you at birth, so you have no control over it. There aren't many cases of this occurrence, yet all of them so far seem to be about trading cursed energy for physical prowess or the other way around. Next, we have another similarity between Jujutsu and Nen, the way this...
Notably, the rarity of Heavenly Pacts is interesting in the sense that we've only encountered two... Well, even then, I guess you could argue Kokichi's isn't perfect because he can still move, but... Tochi's the only perfect one. perfect in the sense that he was born without curse energy. Maki and Mai are also victims of a heavenly restriction, but notably thanks to them being born as twins, it was imperfect from the start. Meaning Mai was likely, if Mai had become the completed variation, she likely would have lost all physical ability, but had gained massive amounts of curse energy to use construction, which may have allowed her to work around it. But Maki got the completed heavenly restriction of 0 cursed energy when Mai sacrificed herself. So there is that trade-off there, but that, once again, was not perfect from birth. It's only Toji. Kokichi could still move, which implies that he may have had an imperfect binding vow that could have gone even further. But, once again, Kokichi didn't get to make it too far anyway. Let's see.
Mystical resource behaves. It's actually part of one's body and can be felt, seen or tracked even without any dojutsu, though the way characters feel it is closer to Bleach and its spiritual power. It flows within one's body, which is crucial to understand for its proper usage and ability to predict what others will do. Hunter x Hunter did it better in my opinion, as in both cases you can see what part of the body will be used to attack, yet Nen goes a step further and adds a risk element of reducing the defenses of everything else. Not to say that sorcerers don't do that, it just was never explicitly shown, except for maybe when Choso saw Yuji's attack coming and defended it by hardening blood in that particular area.
And to be fair, once again, I actually don't know if he's presumably, yeah, I think he's caught up to the manga. But one thing that is interesting, though, the trade-off is actually shown more times than that, even in Shibuya. Maybe, actually, I'll let him finish speaking on this. Maybe he's going to bring it up.
Actually, now that I think about it, Panda
Toto
boosted his frontal defense against Mekamaru, and Toto dropped it completely to avoid becoming Hanami's personal flower garden. Still believe Hunter x Hunter did a better job in this department.
Here's the thing, I do agree. Hunter, like, once again, I haven't read too many power systems or too many manga, so I can't really speak on it. But yeah, Hunter x Hunter does it the best. I don't think it's really a contest. I think the only thing that comes close, from what I've heard, is the stand power system from JoJo's. Once again, I haven't properly read JoJo's yet. I have a lot of context for JoJo's. I make JoJo meme references all the time. Most of them are subconscious, by the way. Like, the amount of times I've yelled, "Tusk Act 4!" in just random directions at my friends is terrifying. Because I can't imagine what would happen if I activated it. But, with it being the case, yeah, I say it is done better. Because mainly, the thing with the reallocation of cursed energy in order to boost attacks is, one, it's very vague on how much it does. And that's a big thing with JJK. A lot of things are vague with the power system, which allows Gege flexibility, but does lead to problems in terms of, like, interpreting what stuff means. But we see it when Toto manages to force all his curse energy into his stomach to block Mahito's hit. So the rest of him wasn't reinforced, but all of it went to his stomach. Interesting. We know it has great defensive utility, but what does that mean for offense? We see Sukuna stop his healing and focus all his curse energy into his fist when he goes to land that black flash on Maki. But what does that mean? Like, how much stronger did his attack get? We don't know. We don't know what the reallocation of force or energy localization really does in JJK, other than mostly defensively. It just makes you bulky enough to survive the attack you're trying to survive, and your attack is vaguely stronger than it would be if you didn't reallocate all your curse energy to a specific limb. Meanwhile, Hunter x Hunter will typically, like, if not directly give you a multiplier, will explain, like, the difference between one's base state and one's reallocated state in terms of its potency, durability, offensive capability, defensive capability, all that. So, yeah, I do agree in general, even with the numerous examples that we see in JJK of people reallocating their curse energy. Heck, we even see Yuji do it against Mahito for his final Black Flash. Yeah, I agree. Hunter x Hunter does better.
But what JJK has improved are traces, or what's called residuals here. Just like normal humans leave footprints, smell and other marks behind, cursed energy remains are left by its users unless they specifically cover them up. It's a very cool concept, because the whole purpose of sorcerers is to hunt curses and curse users. Think of ninjas for a second. They have this entire supernatural spiel, yet with a very few exceptions, they track people by scent and other normal forensic methods. Another thing you can do with Jujutsu energy is pour it into objects. Nothing particularly...
Not Bleach. But, yeah, I think the trace system... It's something that matters in the early series. Once you get past the 100s, not even that. Once you get past the hidden inventory arc, you aren't even at the hundreds. The Jujutsu tracking system doesn't even matter, which is unfortunate. Because by that point on, either characters aren't interacting in a point where the tracking system would actually be useful, or characters hard counter it, or ignore it, or override it anyway. Like, we even see that in hidden inventory. Toji's like, oh yeah, I didn't follow you by your residuals. I can't even probably interact with those things properly. I just followed you by your actual scent. Like, hair. Like, I know where you are. I know who you are. So, ultimately, while it is a neat addition to the power system, I feel like residuals kind of just exist and don't actually do much.
No! Yet, with a very few exceptions, they track people by scent and other normal forensic methods. Another thing you can do with Jujutsu energy is pour it into objects. Nothing particularly new, as most shonens have a version of that, but JJK also mixes in a few cool ideas. The most obvious one are cursed corpses, which is an inanimate object that gets possessed by a curse naturally or with the help of a sorcerer. They aren't exactly marionettes, because these Muppets operate independently, and there's even a one-of-a-kind mutation that resulted in a sentient plushie with a big heart. Moreover, there are cursed tools and cursed objects, with the former being created by a prolonged deliberate exposure to cursed energy, and the latter being mostly remnants of ancient sorcerers. Now, it's time to talk about how Jujutsu is used in the field. Yeah, I wasn't lying when I said
Cursed tools are also a mechanic that kind of goes relatively underexplored for the endless potential that they have. Because, like, think about it. It's Kamutoke, Inverted Spear of Heaven, Soul Split Katana, Chain of 1,000 Miles, Playful Cloud. Did I already say Kamutoke? Kamutoke, Inverted Spear of Heaven, Soul Split Katana, Chain of 1,000 Miles, Dragon Bone. I swear there aren't more than 10. But at least 10 with names. I genuinely do forget, though, because they are that useless. Or at least not necessarily useless, but they just don't do all too much. And by the time the more broken ones could get, like, more screen time, like Inverted Spear of Heaven, they get destroyed by Gojo. Like, what? Playful Cloud, I forgot. So I think it is like 6 that came off the top of my head, which is unfortunate, because they're really, really neat. It's a cool mechanic, because notably, I mean, sometimes, like, I think of Naruto, I think of, like, the Divine Treasures. They are typically imbued with, like, techniques or abilities, but it felt like an aspect of the series that definitely could have been used to buff up lesser characters or characters who don't have any crazy innate potency on their own. And they even do that with certain characters like Maki and Toji, who don't have curse techniques of their own, but use curse tools to compensate for that, such as Soul Split Katana. Meanwhile, characters like Yuji could definitely benefit from a curse tool, characters like Akari could definitely benefit from a curse tool, someone like Yuta could benefit, like, anyone could really benefit from a curse tool, but they're a mechanic that Gege introduces, sprinkles in, gives, like, one character seriously, and gives to another character also seriously, and then never touches it again, which is unfortunate. And then when he gave one to Sukuna, he immediately took it away, because of course it'd be too powerful in Sukuna's hands, which is unfortunate.
that this power system is very elaborate, as all we did so far is establish what cursed energy is and what forms it takes. So, on to what I've already mentioned, general application and personalized application. No need to explain how it increases physical parameters like toughness, speed, power, and so on. It works the same in almost every story. Here, you can also use it as a crude projectile to hit a target from a distance.
Oh, there we go. There's another one. The Finger Bears, I forgot they could do that. Which, ironically enough, I think is stolen directly from Sukuna and his, like, technique projection. One thing that is important to note about the power system, unlike something like Dragon Ball, or even possibly Naruto, there is a cap enforced on the body. That is something that is different from a lot of other power systems. Typically, in something like Dragon Ball, you can just keep stacking ki. You can get more and more ki. You can get ki on ki on ki on ki on ki. You won't just stop at planetary, or multiplanetary, or star level, or solar system, or galaxy, or universal, or multiversal. No, you can just keep going. Of course, there are upper limits to that, in the sense that we just haven't seen characters get that far, but it's at least implied in Dragon Ball that there is no cap. For at least certain species, like Saiyans, like Frieza's rays, like the angels, like the gods of destruction, it's implied that you can just keep getting so much higher. Oh, high. Meanwhile, JJK very specifically has a soft power cap for each individual character. A point where no matter how much cursed energy you have, it doesn't actually matter. Like, for example, Ryu, despite having less cursed energy than Yuta, due to how his body is structured from his birth, he has higher cursed energy output. But even then, he has a soft cap. It's why Hikari Kenji is the most broken character in the verse, despite having literally infinite cursed energy. Because his soft cap makes it so that he's a pillow puncher. Meanwhile, someone like Yuta Okotsu, who would have less cursed energy than an infinite cursed energy Jackpot Hikari, is still a harder hitter. At least based off feats, because his output and the way he's allowed to strike is higher. So, that is an important thing that do matter a bit. But let's see.
However, I've never seen a sorcerer using it offensively, likely because it's a very inefficient way to use cursed energy. But what's very efficient is a barrier, which comes in many flavors. A simple barrier is used for SCP purposes, a veil for a large area cursed energy concealment, and a bunch of other ones used for everything in between. There is even one designed to protect oneself from a domain expansion, a pinnacle of Jujutsu that combines most of what we were talking about, plus an innate curse technique. It's some very dangerous which traps you in a subspace that boosts your opponent and makes their attacks guaranteed to hit. Very few things can help you there, and one of them is to create a small domain of your own which disrupts the domain expansion slightly, making it lose its guaranteed hit effect. The last common usage of Jujutsu are Shikigami. They're basically Pokemons you can create and...
Funny thing is though about like, I'm not gonna say all domain counters, but kind of all domain counters. They're all pretty whack. Like, notably, and it makes sense, right? But like, considering they're meant to be the anti-domains, I mean, Falling Blossom Motion sucks. It doesn't even work against complex techniques. Domain Amplification sucks. Doesn't work against complex techniques. Or at least it's not implied to. The Hollow Wicker Basket sucks. You have to hold your hand together. I'm not even sure if you're not Sukuna. I have no idea how Hollow Wicker Basket is useful in a domain scenario, because your opponent can still punch you in the mouth in their domain. So I don't know how Hollow Wicker Basket is useful. Simple Domain, while someone like Kusakabe is able to use it very, very well, he's known to be the exception to the rule. Otherwise, Simple Domain kind of sucks and can be torn apart by domain expansions. Now, admittedly, we've only seen this with open barrier domain expansions, meaning maybe Simple Domain is more effective against non-open barrier, but still, it seems like Simple Domain would be victimized. So yeah, the domain counters are kind of booty meat. Let's see.
There is nothing too exciting about them, with a couple exceptions. Finally, we get to the meat and potatoes of Jujutsu Kaisen, its various unique abilities. Don't be fooled though, they're deceptively nasty in terms of how much control you have over them. Very little, which is why sorcerers have to think outside the box to merge it with their fighting style and adapt it for each of their opponents. Consider innate curse technique as a weapon you are born with. You might get a beautiful Kriegsmesser or a no less beautiful squeaky hammer. You have to make it work in either case, because there is no exchange policy. What you do have though are several tiers of abilities within any given technique. Normal, extension, maximum output, and a supreme art. The terminology might be a bit off due to translation.
And reversal. But reversals are rare. Notably, the only curse technique reversal we have explicitly seen are two. Unless I'm mistaken, I'm trying to think of if there's another one. But I think it's only two. It is the curse technique reversal of the Limitless, which is red, and then the curse technique reversal of the anti-gravity engine, which is gravity, which is used by Kenjaku. I think those are the only two we've seen, because there are very limited RCT users, and I'm not sure Gege's even thought about what an opposite cleave or opposite dismantle would be, or what an opposite copy would be. And notably, Shoko's not noted to have an innate technique. So there is reversals, but they're very rare, so I understand why he doesn't bring them up here when it comes to innate technique. The extension technique is also quite rare, too. I think there are only three extension techniques? I think it's Resonance from Nobara. I know she has an extension technique. Then Nanami with his ratio technique. And then now Sukuna with World Slash. Those are the only ones that come to mind. Unless you consider Hollow Purple an extension technique, which then would be 4. But even then, that's strange. But let me see.
Yet it boils down to basic ability, more powerful version, maximum energy output, and big energy. Not everyone achieves the last two, but those who do, they aren't messing around. Although it's important to note that not having a super elaborate ability doesn't mean you have no chance against a powerful opponent. Take Toto. All he does is swap location and orientation of anything with cursed energy in his proximity. On paper, that's nothing to write home about until you see it in action, where this absolute gorgeous unit is able to give special grades a run for their money. Additionally, there is a reverse curse technique, which turns cursed energy into positive energy, and it's used to mostly heal human bodies. Sounds kinda reasonable, since cursed energy comes from negativity and is supernatural. You have to make it good first to restore a physical body. And just like with the domain expansion, it's very advanced sorcery, with only about a dozen characters being able to use it. Oh.
Gojo, Sukuna, Urume, Kenjaku, Yuda, Yuji, Higuruma. Oh, we may actually hit a dozen? I think that's it, though. Who else? I feel like I'm missing one. Who else uses RCT? Who else? Because I don't think... Oh, Yuki. There's 8. Ooh, Shoko's 9. Oh, yeah, I think... I'm probably forgetting 3 more. Oh, Hazanoki, that's 10. So, yeah, it probably is about a dozen. It is about a dozen. RCT is actually pretty common. The external RCT is the rare thing. That's only the 3 characters in the series that can do that. But yeah, he's right. What was I going to say? And that was the thing I wanted to say. I didn't want to just touch on the RCT topic. Oh, the point he made about Toto and the idea that you can punch above your weight class. One thing I do like about the JJK power system, though, is that has limits. Like, Boogie Woogie is never going to be a truly offensive technique. You need to compile that. Meanwhile, something like the Limitless, or Cleave, or Dismantle, or 10 Shadows, like, they are all innately offensive and defensive. Meanwhile, Toto's Boogie Woogie is more exclusively a defensive support ability. So there are levels to it. There are definitely levels to it, and there are definitely matchups where, no matter how good you are with your curse technique, if someone else's curse technique is just that much infinitely better, you will not win. Which I think is good. I think it's important to have that kind of stuff in the power system. While there's always nice to have hope that anyone could win, and that all men are created equal, and there's always an equal chance of possibility and success and all that, yeah, that ain't realistic. It's good enough to have those moments where, you tried your best wasn't good enough, and then you get annihilated. But let's see.
And I almost forgot, there is this move that, technically speaking, anybody can use, as it's not tied to an innate technique: Black Flash. In simple terms, it's a critical strike that has a 2.5 multiplier, except that you need both skill and a degree of luck in order to land it. 2 reasons why this attack is so significant. Number 1, it deepens your understanding of Jujutsu, making you a better sorcerer overall, as well as empowering your several subsequent attacks with a bit more oomph and a much greater chance of landing another Black Flash. Number 2, it's a devastating attack because of how sorcerers usually fight. Remember my analogy with Nen. When taking a blow, you're protecting yourself with an equivalent amount of cursed energy. Let me visualize it with numbers. If Yuji throws a punch using 100 points of cursed energy, his opponent will have to counter with 100 points of their own, otherwise they take damage. In combat, given speed and mental fatigue, you can't always counter with the correct amount, so instead of 100, you block with 95, resulting in 5 points of damage. But what if you get hit with a Black Flash? You can't see it coming, as it happens in a fraction of a moment, meaning you will have a 95 defense against a 250 attack.
And that is admittedly an error. That is a mistake in the Jujutsu Kaisen power system. Remember, it is actually not a 2.5 times multiplier. It is exponentially raising the attack to 2.5 times. So in this equation in particular, using mathematics, and it's going to sound bad, it's going to sound crazy, but it would be 100 times 100 times 50. So 100 times 100 times 50. 500,000. I'm sad that I had to calc that up real quick. My brain is not working right now. But 500,000 is actually the attack you would need to guard against if Black Flash truly is an exponential increase of 2.5 times. You see how stupid that is? Like, notably, his explanation makes more sense because characters don't immediately die when hit by Black Flash, which they should. I say this, and I'll mention it, and I'll talk about it. I have a video, I'm planning a video about it anyway. But Black Flash cannot be, it simply cannot be an actual 2.5 exponential multiplier. It can't. Characters would die immediately. Anything. Because realize, say this were the case, right? Say Yuji was actually punching with 100 attack, or no, 10 attack, and Mahito was still guarding with 100. 10 times 10 is 100. Times 5 is 500. Meaning he'd still be doing 5 times the damage that Mahito's defending with. Which means Mahito would lose limbs if he was attacking with just a tenth of what he was specifically attacking for. But he's supposed to be attacking with how many more times? For reference, he says 250 attack to the 95 defense. With that incorrect assertion of Black Flash and its multiplier. But that would make more sense because Mahito takes extreme damage but is not immediately atomized. What is 500,000 divided by 250? 2,000. For reference, Yuji's Black Flash would actually be 2,000 times stronger than the mathematics he has displayed here. Do you realize why it can't actually be that? Like unless I'm insane, but legitimately characters should be atomized by Black Flashes. It's why no one, like at least in the Crossverse sense, no one takes the Black Flash multiplier seriously. Because realize, even if you were to multiply the amount of jewels it would take to destroy, let's say, what's the lowest end I've seen JJK take it to? Like, let's just say building level. Let's say JJK's building level. I forget what the calc is. And I don't think it was building level. There was some calc. I think it was either the mountain level or something. But essentially, a Black Flash were to actually be a 2.5 times exponential multiplier, it would literally be solar system. The whole verse would be solar system level. Because that was based on a Yuji Black Flash. An early series Yuji Black Flash. Do you think the JJK verse is solar system level? No, right? That means it can't be. So this actually makes more sense, even though it's incorrect based on what the series says. Like, it's crazy, and it's dumb. But once again, I'll talk about Black Flash more in some video, and everything else he said was right. In the idea of, like, things get stronger for a little bit afterwards. You enter the zone, and the zone allows you to hit Black Flashes easier, and you get a further exploration of Curse Energy. Honestly, that should have just been what Black Flash was. They should not have introduced, I hate to say it, I don't think they should have introduced the power multiplier thing, because it raises too many questions, especially considering how much more powerful the scale of attack should be with Black Flash, if it were truly the case. But it's too late now. We're way too deep into it, but let's see.
Now that's a lot of damage, and even though these numbers are an approximation, I hope this little display clarified why this move is so dangerous. Alright, time to compare it to some other shows. Obviously, it took a lot of inspiration from Nen, so it's reasonable to start here, considering Hunter x Hunter is already a benchmark when talking about anime power systems. It's actually somewhat close, and you've already heard the similarities I brought up in addition to some differences. They are both very creative systems that have a steep learning curve, which starts with the most everyone has to figure out and evolves into a diverse set of individual abilities where no two are alike. This is where JJK feels a bit inferior though, because like it or not, Cursed Energy has a great element of randomness. You either got an innate technique or you didn't, not to mention that some of them are way more broken than the others. In Hunter x Hunter, you do have a genetic lottery when it comes to your Nen potential, but you can create your own ability even if it doesn't suit you. Say you are an enhancer and you want a ranged attack. Totally doable, you'll just have to work harder and it won't be as powerful. Yo Mahis, what about specialists? They're also rare and can be totally broken. Good question. A specialist is indeed a luck thing, however, to say that it trumps everyone else just because they have a cool, otherwise unobtainable ability is incorrect, because there is always a caveat. Nen is rarely about overpowering, it's mostly about outsmarting. Take Hisoka and Castro. I honestly think that in a straight hand-to-hand, this menace to shonen protagonists loses, if not always, but most of the time, and the reason he was able to secure a W is the same reason why Gojo was sealed. Castro lost the mental battle. In Jujutsu Kaisen, combat certainly has the element of strategy, don't get me wrong, yet it feels a bit more power-based and even unfair, as a person without a technique is severely disadvantaged against a sorcerer who got lucky. Following Tagashi's work, there are some points of comparison to Naruto. Chakra also...
Okay, so let's talk about the comparison of Nen and Cursed Energy. I do think the freedom and flexibility allowed by Nen that allows one to create their own curse technique or their own Nen ability is more useful, just considering all the levels of customization you can do with it, like Gon's technique versus Killua's technique versus Kurapika's technique versus Leorio's technique. Like, they all have their own unique twists on them, and I think that is good. But once again, I think due to the limiting nature of JJK, in a way, it forces characters around similar power levels to get more creative. Like and I mean more creative in the application of what little they have. Because with Nen, the freedom and flexibility is a beautiful thing that allows for creative expression that deeply ties into each respective character, which is wonderful, and I do think that makes the system better. But I still do find value in the limited nature and the randomness and the power focus of JJK's system. Because once again, it plays into the natural power and balance of the world of Jujutsu Kaisen. So I think the limitations that the system provide actually bolster the narrative, in spite of them actively limiting the narrative. Which sounds crazy, I know, but I think it is. I still prefer Nen though. Like, I'll be completely honest. The creativity and freedom of Nen and how it ties into characters is very, very good. Very, very good. Better than what JJK has to offer. Even though techniques or a lack of technique do also feed into how characters feel in JJK, it's basically never as deep as Nen. The closest example is like Gojo with the Limitless and how that feeds into his character. But once again, it just ain't Nen. Let's see. Chakra is also interesting. Oh, and there's one thing, that's one difference between Hunter x Hunter and JJK as well. Hunter x Hunter has Nen types. There are cursed energy traits in JJK, but they are super duper rare. Only 2 characters have confirmed cursed energy traits. Others are loosely interpreted. But only 2. It's Kashimo and Akari. They're the only 2 to ever display cursed energy traits. And the roughness and the sparking. That's it. And notably, they both become immediately irrelevant right after they're introduced. Hikari's rough punching style basically gets ignored right after it's introduced, and Kashimo fights Hikari and then Sukuna, neither of which note his electricity. Outside of like a tingle from Hikari. So yeah, it's unfortunate. Meanwhile, the Nen archetypes do specifically play into how characters structure their techniques and abilities, which allows for, once again, further customization and actualization, and allows for higher skill ceilings in Nen, because you can escape your pre-designated birth path with enough hard work. But let's see.
Has some basic stuff and advanced in relation to one's elemental affinity. In theory, this system allows for a rock-paper-scissors dynamic against an opponent, as well as opens many opportunities for team combinations. In practice though, we mostly saw lightning messing up the Earth's moves in like 4 or 5 instances where elements were combined to empower an attack. I'm not talking about 50 Shades of Rasengan or other unique individual. This is a fundamental part of Shinobi's arsenal and should have been highlighted more, especially with their team dynamic. Going back to Jujutsu Kaisen, we kinda have that, there are just very few examples. Nobara, hard counters, rot technique, but good.
Yeah. That is true. The rock paper scissors aspect of Naruto is dropped basically immediately. The main attack of Naruto, the Rasengan, is very specifically noted to not have a chakra designation. The most famous attack from the entire series does not have a chakra designation. If that doesn't show you how basically irrelevant the element system is, I don't know what will. Like you said, the most prominent usage of it is the Deidara and Sasuke fight. Outside of that, and like water versus fire, the matchups barely matter. And JJK is very matchup specific though. It's not shown as often as it could be, but specifically when you're running JJK versus battles, like inverse, the matchups become extremely important, generally speaking. Like very, very important. To the point of extreme hard counters, like Nobara versus the Rot technique and Haruto versus Nobara, where their technique was basically irrelevant. Let's see.
Luck to her landing a blow on Ampharius' knockoff. On that note, another aspect of Jujutsu I believe is a bit undercooked is whatever this witchcraft was. Crossing a river is an important act in sorcery. I mean, sure, there's some truth to that, yet we were never told that it also implies superstitious and spiritual stuff in addition to a pretty tangible cursed energy. Next we have all the other systems like Haki,
I completely forgot that was even a thing.
Devil fruits, quirks, Hamon, breathing, Ryatsu and so on, but we don't need to compare it to everything, so it's time to draw some conclusions. Jujutsu is a pretty alright system. It has a bunch of rules and follows them decently, allowing for a reasonable as well as predictable progression of a character's arsenal. Discovering a spell that will save the day mid-battle. Everything you see was either learned on screen or was already known by that person. Still, I can't deny the fact that the show leaves a lot of room for a new innate technique or a cursed object to shake up the story when the plot demands it. It won't be our first rodeo and definitely not the last, yet so far, most things that have anything to do with cursed energy in Jujutsu Kaisen have been pretty rational, even if to this day I don't know what it means to multiply cursed energy by itself in practice. It was I, Mahis, analyzing negative emotions into the microphone. Have a great whatever time of the day you have. Until next time, cheers.
W video. Multiplying cursed energy, I always legit just imagined it as like taking cursed energy in your left hand, taking cursed energy in your right hand, forming it into orbs and stacking it together, and then the reaction that comes from that is positive energy. That's how I rationalized it. How you do that in your body, I don't know. I agree with them on that. I don't know how you do it inside. But overall, yeah, very, very W video. Outside of that, like, one misinterpretation or mistake on Black Flash, which I don't blame him for, since the series does not portray Black Flash to the level of power it should have. Real good. Ultimately, I'd say Jujutsu Kaisen is on the upper echelon of power systems. I think the specificity of it and the flexibility that is born of it allows for more creativity and uniqueness than what one would typically get, which I think is very, very important in terms of like developing a power system. And the looseness of it does allow for some flexibility, some rule breaking, some fun stuff, which I still think is important in order to allow the plot to progress without strictly hard limiting it in a way that something like Full Metal Alchemist does. But ultimately, I will admit, I do prefer the Full Metal Alchemist power system more than this. I do prefer Nen more than this. But I do say I prefer Jujutsu Kaisen power system more than the Naruto chakra system and the Dragon Ball Ki system because of the complexities that come with it and the limitations that are much more hard set in stone. So overall, I think JJK's double power system, I think this is a this is a W video. And if you somehow made it all the way to the end of this video, please do me a favor and leave system power leave system power in the comment section down below. And thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like, share, comment, and subscribe. And make sure you hit that little key spell so you know how to sell on any videos that come to the channel. Also, I do happen to have a Patreon down below where you can support me for as low as $1 things like exclusive videos, early content, and more. You also become a member of the channel for as low as $3 a month to get the same perks and more. So those perks include the live reaction to the very next chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen, along with ad-free variations of all my videos. And if you become a $25 patron or a $25 member, you can order whatever video you want. Now, and to thank you so much for watching once again, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day. This is Dagger the Pencil, writing off. I'd like to give a thank you to our $3 members: O'Connor Plays, Greyhound, Akids Void, Astro, Eternal Flame, Teen Midgao, Querencia Tala, and Red Wolf 4765. And I'd like to give a thank you to our $5 patrons: Steron, Sean, Panda Goat, Midnight Lord 21, Marcus, Kevin, Igneal, and Ehac1. And I'd like to give another thank you to our $7 members: Autumn's Mornings Lazo and Sick Addiction. And I'd like to give a hefty thank you to our $10 member, Banana Phone. And I'd like to give a big old thank you to our $10 patrons, Joaquin, Jermaine, and Idem Okami. And I'd like to give a gargantuan thank you to our $25 patron, China Doll 09. And another gargantuan, juicy, scrumdiddlyumptious thank you to our $25 patron, Calvin Elder.